All right, so welcome everyone to this broadcast. It's a pretty exciting day for you guys because you've got a great opportunity here to do something really meaningful in your organisation, and your CEO has given you the the opportunity to do that. And with Megan's excellent guidance, you'll be able to put together a performance management system that'll really make a big difference. So really my job in this hour is to stimulate your thought, throw some ideas at you, give you some ideas about what's happening around the world in relation to performance management. And so what will happen is this afternoon, through a number of activities Megan will take you through, as I'm sure you're well aware, you'll have an opportunity to start to look at your own system and how it should work. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity for all of you. And so it doesn't happen, I've got to tell you, it doesn't happen that often in the private sector or the public sector or even in the not-for-profit sector as you are. It doesn't happen that often where you get the chance to put together your own performance management system. So that's great news. All right, so I'm just going to run through a lot of information in a very short period of time. What I really suggest that you do is write down any questions that you've got, because you're probably aware that we'll have a lunch break, and after the lunch break what will happen is that I will just simply answer questions that you've got. So that way I can get through a lot of information very quickly, and then when we come back you can ask me a bunch of questions that will be around my presentation or performance generally or performance reviews, whatever you choose to, because at the end of the day all of you there have got to put together your own system. Okay. All right, so there's basically three things that I want to go through in this morning's session, or partly this morning's session anyway. I want to look at the whole notion of some of the problems that we've got with performance reviews. Now, you've probably been aware that it's not the most popular subject in the world. Most people probably don't think they work very well, and I just want to sort of talk a little bit about why that's the case. Then I want to talk a little bit about the whole idea of performance, because particularly in the not-for-profit, I think performance is a lot more than just doing what's on your job description. And what I'm hoping you can do is in your performance management process that you put together, that you be mindful of non-job roles. So I'll talk a little bit about non-job roles. And then what I'll do is I'll share with you a framework called the 5 Conversations Framework, which I know works really well. You don't have to use the 5 Conversations Framework, and please, it's you work out what you want to do, but it's just a process that I know works, but you can really develop your own particular process along the way. So 3 things we're getting out of this short, sharp session. All right, so in terms of your organisation, your vision up the top there is really is for a stronger, connected and more supportive community. So what I want you to do is to think carefully about that vision when you start putting together your performance management system, because that vision is important, it is critical. The wonderful thing that you're doing in your organisation is that you're doing something that is very tangible and very evident in terms of the good that you do in the community. Why that's really helpful in this regard is that it's a lot easier, of course, to get people focused and motivated on the real reason that they're doing the work. So just keep in mind that that happens to be your vision, and you need to think about that as you go through the process. There's a little bit of a delayed reaction as these slides come up, but another thing that is coming that is fairly clear is that one of your action steps, if you like, for this year and next year is this performance review effectiveness. So obviously that's why you're here today. That's what Megan's doing, working with you. So it's, as I said before, it's a great opportunity and I just grab it with both hands and run with it because, as I said, not many organisations get that opportunity. I should also say a lot of organisations don't even get the opportunity when their human resources manager can actually go ahead and have the freedom to decide. So it's great news for you. All right. So if you actually went out and you talked to people and you said, you know, are you in favour of performance reviews? Generally speaking, what would happen is that you get three camps of people. And I'll just put them up as we go and we talk about it. So in terms of performance reviews, there'd be one group of people who would probably say that performance reviews are fine and really it's the managers conducting them that's the problem, which of course all of you may not be managers, you're team leaders, but nevertheless you'd be conducting them. So there is a group saying there's absolutely nothing wrong with the tools that we're using, but the problem is the managers. So that's a group of people out there. I might say that group of people is getting smaller and smaller, but there's another group of people out there that say that, you know, performance reviews are not working and what we need to do is to abolish them. So I think that that group is growing quite significantly over the last 5 years. There is a significant number of large organisations around the world who are now saying that the performance reviews don't work, let's get rid of them. So I, of course, happen to belong to that camp. And then there's another group of people who say that the performance reviews would be better if we just improved the process. So if we tinkered with the process, perhaps if we made the forms a little bit easier, perhaps if we gave our, you know, managers some training on how to have performance reviews, perhaps if we sold the whole idea better, we'd get a better outcome. Now, there's still a fairly large group of people in that area, but I don't think your job this afternoon is really about how do you tinker with it. I think it's about how do you fundamentally change it. So I think that's why I say it's an exciting opportunity. And I think that the growing group of those three, of course, is the one up in the top left-hand corner. That is that performance reviews aren't working and we need to abolish them. All right. So if you look at these organisations, and of course you'd recognise many of them, of course none of them are not-for-profit, but nevertheless, if you look at those organisations, they've all got something significant in common. Well, obviously one of them is that they're all multinationals. But the other thing that they've got in common is that all of them have actually abolished their performance reviews over the last couple of years, or at least are in the process of doing so. And what I want to do is just give you some insight into why they're doing that and what they're going to try and do to replace the performance review. So all of these are seriously big players in the world. Many of us, of course, use their products day to day, and these companies have come to the conclusion that the performance review isn't working. So they belong to that group that I mentioned before, saying let's throw it out and let's replace it with something else. So let's have a look at a couple of reflections, if I may. So GE, or what used to be called General Electric, basically they've announced that they're abolishing what they call their rank and yank system. So what they used to do, and they used to rank everybody, and so when Jack Welch was the president of the company, the people who were at the lower end of the ranking got fired. So they just got shown the door. That was what used to happen. And then they'd be replaced with hopefully more competent operators. Well, that clearly has changed significantly. So they've made a profound change where they're getting rid of their ranking system. And I'm sure I anticipate some questions from you after lunch around the whole idea of how do we rank people, or should we rank people, or whatever. And that's fair. But I would make this comment to you all and just have a think about this. If we want our employees to work together, that's the people that work for you, if you want them working together and not competing with one another, towards achieving a common goal, removing ranking is a good starting point. Now that might sound a little bit controversial, but the bottom line is if you're ranking, say, I don't know how many people are reporting to each of you, but let's say you've got, just pick a number, 10. Let's say you've got 10 people reporting to you. If you're ranking those 10 people, then effectively what you're doing is creating competition between 10 people. Now there's nothing wrong with that, but the truth is if you're doing that, you can't expect teamwork at the same time. You've got to make a decision. Do you want teamwork or do you want competition? And if you want the latter, competition, then sure, keep ranking. But if you want teamwork, it's actually going to be counter to what you're trying to achieve. So let's keep moving with some of these large companies and some of the insights that they've talked about. Accenture has 330,000 employees, and what they're undergoing, or what their CEO is talking about, is a massive revolution in which they want timely, personalised feedback to replace annual evaluations and rankings. So they're looking very much at the feedback model. So they're looking at, how can we give people regular, honest, open, subjective feedback as a means of replacing the performance review. So that's what they're attempting to do in their organisation. Microsoft, I'm sure a lot of us, I do anyway, use their products, and they are overhauling their performance management system, and they are also moving in the same direction where they're getting rid of their normal annual review and they're replacing it with regular, constant feedback. So you can see that there's a bit of a pattern developing here at the top end of town, if you like. Now, Laszlo Bock, who happens to be the human resources manager at Google, and in fact he's just written a book which I think is being very well received, had this comment to make, and I think it really sums up pretty much everything that I've been trying to talk about so far, and that is that performance management as practiced by most organisations has become a rule-based bureaucratic process existing as an end in itself, rather than actually shaping performance. Employees hate it, managers hate it, even HR departments hate it. So he really gets to the nub of it, and so the question that I ask, of course, is, if that's the case, why are we doing it? So let me talk about some myths about performance reviews, because I think we need to unpack some of the reasons why we do this. So let's have a look at there's 5 myths that I want to cover here. And the first myth that I want to cover, coming up on the screen now, yep. So the first myth is increasing individual performance actually increases organisational performance. Well, that's actually a myth, because it's really what happens between people. So if you actually think about the work that you do, a lot of the real work is the communication, the connection between the different stakeholders that you work with. So for example, if I've got, I don't know, let's say I have to write reports. Now, if I'm expected to complete my report by, say, 4 o'clock on the Friday afternoon, so I'm expected to submit that to my manager, and let's say that for 3 Friday afternoons in a row I've been late and I've submitted it a week later. Well, obviously I'm not performing my job. And so if there was a performance review, then clearly I wouldn't do very well on report writing. But if that manager sat down with me and said, look, I'm keen to know what's happening and why can't you get your reports in on time, and I said to them, well, look, you know what, the people who need to give me the data in another department have been slow to getting it to me, and because they've been slow to get it to me, I haven't been able to complete my report. So you can see that my individual performance is very contingent on other people's performance. So this is where performance reviews are problematic, because just by trying to increase individual performance does not actually increase organisational performance if in fact all the component parts of an organisation aren't working together effectively. Myth number two. Myth number two is that we need performance reviews to objectively categorise people. Now, I don't work in your industry, but if I got on a plane and I flew down there and I basically sat next to you or near you or in your area for 20 minutes, I would be able to tell very quickly who's performing and who's not. It's not a mystery. We all know who's performing. So the whole idea that we've got to categorise people and review people and all the rest to know who's performing objectively is nonsense. We already know who's performing and who isn't. We don't need a performance review to tell us that. So what we do need is to be bold enough to have the conversation with people about what they're not doing well, and perhaps as importantly what they are doing well and how we can capitalise on that. Myth number three is managers are in the best position to make judgments about people's performance. Well, are they? Are you in the best position to make judgment about the people that report to you, I wonder? Maybe, maybe not. But of course the whole review is set up on the basis that the manager is the person who has the best line of sight. But the employee themselves has a view about their own performance. Some of the stakeholders that they work with has a view about their performance. And so the whole idea that the manager is in the best position to make that judgment is not necessarily correct. Sometimes it is, but not always. And the performance review has been set up. It came out of the military, where the whole idea was that the superior would give the subordinate feedback, and that was the end of it. There was no ifs, buts or maybes. If they got 3 out of 5, that was what they got, because the assumption was that the manager, or the superior in that case, was in the best position to give them some feedback. Okay, myth number four. Myth number four is that performance reviews enhance employee performance. Do you know what? There is absolutely no research anywhere that I've come across, and this is my forte. I have found no research to demonstrate that performance reviews actually enhance employee performance. I have found some research to actually show that performance reviews decrease performance. So that's a myth. So, and I think we're sort of coming to realise that that is a myth, because we kind of know it's not working. And number 5, the myth is around performance reviews are designed to help employees. I don't think so. I think they're there to help HR and to help the organisation slice and dice and categorise people. I think it's all about managers. I don't think it's much about employees. So I just wanted to raise those with you, because I think a lot of people that hold on to the view that performance reviews are a great thing probably also adopt these 5 beliefs, which I hope you can see are actually not correct. I in fact did discuss this with a number of HR managers around the world. In fact, I did a survey online of 6,000 HR managers, which is a good survey, and I simply asked them the question, you know, what's the one thing that you'd like to change in your performance reviews? And I came up with 8 themes, and I'll just run through them very briefly with you, because when people wrote these down, what I did is I categorised them around a series of themes. Here are some themes. One of the themes was that they're a costly exercise, and they are. You know, the fact is, when you sit down with a group, you sit down with an individual, you've got to do a bit of preparation, you've got to do the performance interview, you might have to do some paperwork after, maybe the employee has a little bit of preparation to do as well. If you work all that out, it costs a significant amount of money, not necessarily dollars and cents, but the time spent doing it could be better spent with you working out in the field with your stakeholders. So it's costly. I also got feedback that it was destructive. In other words, a lot of people felt that the way their manager was conducting it was akin to bullying. Whether or not it was bullying or not is another question, but they felt that it wasn't done very well. and HR managers after review time really start to have to, sort through this and talk to people about a range of things. Appraisals are usually a monologue rather than a dialogue. In other words, the manager does all the talking and the person on the receiving end does very little. And this is problematic because it's not a real conversation. So that became an issue. Another issue that was raised with me is the formality of the appraisal. Often these things are done in the office, the manager's office, or they're done at the time when the manager wants to do them. The person on the receiving end doesn't have much say in that process. And that whole formality stifles the ability to have genuine dialogue. So that became an issue. Another issue was that the appraisals are done too infrequently. Now, look, if they're done once a year is an eternity in your industry. Just look at what's happened with NDIS and a range of things. I mean, a year is a long time, and in this day and age at least. So doing it once a year is ridiculous because the ground shifted significantly since the last time. So what some organisations have tried to do is to do it twice a year, and then it's just doubling up on the workload. Another issue around performance reviews is that the appraisal was seen by many people, particularly managers and some HR folk, as a form-filling exercise, a bureaucratic exercise where people just filled out forms. And it's probably very true because the forms can be quite complicated and they're expected to be done. Another issue around the appraisal is that they were rarely followed up. So in other words, once it's done, the stress is out of the way, thank goodness that's over. They get filed electronically or in a filing cabinet, and we never look at them again until we have to sort of look at them in 12 months' time. So that's pretty useless because nothing changes as a result of the review. And then, of course, everybody finds them hugely stressful, as you saw from the previous quote. Managers don't like it, employees don't like it, HR don't like it. So it just becomes a really super stressful exercise. And the question then I have is, why are we doing it? A little bit of stress is no problem. We've got enough of it in our lives. Do we need additional stress? So there were 8 things that came up, and you might want to question me later after lunch about any of those 8. So the other thing that I think is important here, as I just put these things up on the slide, is that the whole idea, and you probably get this, is that as team leaders, your whole idea of leadership is changing profoundly. I mean, it wasn't long ago where you could just tell people what to do, which we'd call the command and control approach. You might find now, particularly with younger millennials coming into the workplace, they don't really respond very well to that. In fact, I would argue that no one really responds well to being told what to do. So really our leadership style in this day and age is more of an adaptive style, more of a collaborative style, more of a coaching approach, developing people, influencing people, problem solving. All of those things are really what your role entails. So if your role entails all of those things, then the whole idea of doing a performance review seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? So we've got to understand that the world is changing and that the way you lead people is changing as well. Now, in one of my books, I made the statement, and the statement I made was that organisations are conversations. So when you think about it, your organisation is just a series of conversations that go on day to day, moment by moment, stakeholder by stakeholder. Some are long, some are short, some are productive, some are unproductive, some are work-related, some are not. Some are structured, some are not. Some are done in the lunchroom. Some of them are done in the boardroom. Some of them are done in people's offices. Some of them are done in the park, outside. They're done everywhere. So if you think about that, then organisations are just a bunch of people working towards a common cause. So if that's the case, then we need to bring the human being back to work. And, you know, isn't it interesting how we think that robots are now going to be taking our jobs? And yet we as human beings are becoming more robotic in the way we do things. You're not allowed to bring your emotions to work. Toughen up, princess. You know, you can't handle the truth. All these kind of things. What we're trying to do is to dehumanize people at work, which is absolute nonsense. At the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings that happen to be workers, not workers that happen to be human beings. So I'd ask you to consider this in your system this afternoon. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about going soft on people, because having regular, constant feedback and conversations with people actually is not, there's nothing soft about that at all. And these conversations aren't always tough, of course. Some of them are very pleasant. Some of them can be encouraging. Some of them can be uplifting. Some of them can be inspiring. Some of them can be about your vision and what you want people to achieve. So just have a think that organisations are really a conversation, a regular, ongoing conversation. So the question that I ask you is, how can you improve the quality of the conversations that you have inside Windermere? How can you do that? Now, another thing I'd like to touch on, if I may, is this concept, and I think this might be a little bit provocative. You might see it as such, being provocative, but here's a little statement that I'd like to throw out there to you, and I'd like you to have a think about it. The roles that people play in organisations are more important than the jobs they do. All right, so the roles people play in organisations are more important than the jobs they do. So what do I actually mean by that? Well, let's have a look, if I can put this up. This will be up on your screen shortly. There we go. Yep. Okay, so the work that people do. So think about the work that you do and think about the work that the people who you work with do. There's two dimensions to their work. One dimension, of course, is the job that they perform. Now, the job that they perform is pretty much their technical skills. All right, so the jobs that people perform on their job description, okay, so there's nothing terribly revealing about that. What I would say to you is this, though, that is only one dimension of what people do, albeit a reasonably important dimension, but it's only one dimension of what people do at work. There is another dimension that gets sadly missed, and that's this dimension. This dimension, as it's coming up on your screen now, is the non-job roles that people play. So these are roles that aren't actually on the job description, that nevertheless must be done, and if they're not done, performance is not going to be satisfactory. So what are they? I've actually identified 4 that I think are hugely applicable to your workplace, and not only your workplace, but any workplace. So you can pick any. You could pick an orchestra, the police service. You could pick, Google. I would argue that all 4 of these are critically important to performance. Let's have a look at them. One role that I think people play that's not necessarily written down in their job description is having a positive attitude and enthusiasm to the work that people do. Now, I don't expect people to come to work bouncing off the walls, and I'm sure you don't either, but I certainly wouldn't be expecting people to come along to work whinging and whining and complaining, and I mean, you know, and I know that there are people that do this, and I don't think that's reasonable. I think people should have a reasonably positive can-do attitude when they come to work. Let's face it, can you imagine if all the people working in your organisation had a negative attitude? It wouldn't matter how technically competent they were, it would be problematic. So I would challenge you this afternoon to start thinking of non-job roles as much as job roles, okay? I would challenge you to think that one of the key non-job roles that people play is to be a team player. Basically, you know, the work that you do is usually quite complex. There are lots of stakeholders involved. There are lots of people that have to be dealt with. In many ways, your role is a coordination role. And if you don't have people that can operate in a team environment, that can be hugely problematic, as I'm sure you're aware. And of course, we know people that aren't in that realm. In fact, I know of people who will actually say to me, you know what, Tim, I'm not a team player, but I get my job done. I don't think that's good enough. I actually expect people to be operating as a team. It's just fundamental to any workplace. Imagine if everyone in your workplace didn't operate as a team, what that would mean. Another non-job role that I think is critically important is what I call the career role, and that the career role is essentially around people continually growing and developing their own skill set so that they can add value to your workplace, or indeed if they move on to another workplace, they can add value to that workplace as well. Again, you often hear people saying, oh, you know, I don't want to use that new computer program. I'm okay using this system that we're already operating on. Or I don't want to go to that training program because frankly, I'm too old to learn. You hear this all the time. Well, I don't think that's good enough. I think people need to be, as the cliche or the familiar saying goes, people need to be lifelong learners. So we want people to be lifelong learners. So I think that's fair and reasonable that we expect people to continually grow and develop in their role. And finally, we're expecting people to bring their brains to work and not to leave them in a paper bag at the doorway. We actually want people to be coming up with ways and means of making the business or the organisation more efficient and effective. We want people to bring their ideas. Now, you being non-for-profit, not-for-profit, you've got to be very prudent about how you spend your money. You've got to be very careful about how you use your resources. That whole area is ripe for innovation and continuous improvement. And if people don't bring their ideas to work, it's a serious problem. So I would encourage you this afternoon to think about whatever system you come up with, that you might consider embedding at least those 4 non-job roles in there. Because can you imagine an organisation that is only performing what's on the left-hand side, which is their job role, and not performing what's on the right-hand side? What sort of organisation it would be? I would suggest to you there'd be some serious problems in performance. So I think it's worth thinking about non-job roles as important, as an important dimension, if you like, of performance. So let me demonstrate this to you, because I think that sometimes when I say those sorts of things, people go, oh yes, but still what's on the job description is critically important. Here's a survey that was conducted by Warner, and Warner conducted this survey a few years ago now, and he spoke to 9,000 managers across 4 continents. And in that survey, he simply asked each manager to identify the number one attribute that they were looking for in an employee, the number one attribute. And have a look at the list that's in front of you there, and what you might find, what you can see clearly, is that there's nothing on that list that's actually a job role. Everything on that list is a non-job role. So these are things that are not listed in the job description, and these are things that are critically important in terms of people performing at work. So I just wanted to underline the critical importance of non-job roles in your performance system this afternoon. Okay, so what systems are out there, guys? let's have a look and see what's going on in the world of performance management. Broadly speaking, if I just build this up, you've got on a continuum, on the left-hand side, you've got the traditional approach, then you've got the discussion approach, and then you've got the peer group approach on the right-hand side. Now, you're moving, of course, from a traditional approach. So what's the traditional approach all about? Let's get these words up. So in the traditional approach, it was pretty much built on the military, as I mentioned before, where, you know, the superior would give the subordinates some feedback, and at the end of the day, whatever that feedback was, it was it. The employee never got any say in it. And of course, their whole career depends very much on what the manager's feedback was. On the other end of the continuum, you've got teams of people now giving feedback on each other. So this is called peer group feedback. So you've got, you know, in a small office you might have 10 people, and each of them fill out a feedback diagnostic once or twice a year in terms of their perspective about what the person's, you know, performing at and what they're not. And in the middle you've got a relationship approach, which is very much based on conversations. So this one here is based, the military one's based on power. That is, the manager has all the power, so therefore they can make all the decisions. The discussion model is based on an agreement between two people in a conversation. And the peer group approach is based on multiple perceptions. So in other words, we've got more than one person's point of view about someone's performance. The traditional approach is based on managerial judgment, whereas the discussion approach is based on a mutual agreement, so both parties coming to a mutual understanding of what needs to happen. And of course, in the peer group approach, the peer group overall, in an aggregate sense, has a judgment about people. My view is that you probably aren't ready to go from the left to the right, but I'm certainly, you know, you can keep an open mind to that. But I think you can certainly move into the realm of more feedback, discussion, and so on, which is one step removed from where you currently are. So you might want to think about where you want to position yourself in terms of your process this afternoon as well. Now, I'm just going to talk about the five conversations framework, just to kind of finish up. And, you know, I'm sure you'll have a bunch of questions and comments and observations for me after lunch, but the 5 conversations framework I put together because I just, you know, I got to the view that the performance review wasn't working, so I decided to say, well, what can we replace it with? So what I've done is that you can see that on the left-hand side that I've got the months. You can see that there are 5 months. In the next column, you can see that they're the headings or the topics that are covered in these conversations each month. So arguably what should happen here in my 5 conversations framework is that each team leader, that's you, would sit down with each of your people once a month and have a short conversation with each person once a month. So basically have 5 conversations over 5 months. That might sound like a huge amount of work, but each of these conversations are actually designed to be 10 minutes in duration. So we're not talking huge amounts of time. We're talking about pretty much check-in type arrangements. And there's only a couple of questions for each topic anyway. So in the middle column you can see the content of the topic, and over on the right hand side you can see the key questions that that can be asked in these conversations to get the conversation going. In fact, the first question to ask in the climate review conversation, which is really about job satisfaction, morale and communication, is very much on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, 1 being low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? And, you know, the person might say, oh, I'll give it a 6. And you might say as a team leader, why? And they might say, well, you know, I have my I have my good days and my bad days, but generally speaking, I quite enjoy my work, and that's why I'm rating it a 6. As a team leader, you might say, well, is there anything that I can do to perhaps increase the job satisfaction from a 6 to an 8? They might say, well, yeah, more pay. May not be able to do that, but there might be something constructive that comes out of that. So it's really about, you know, checking in where people are at in their job satisfaction and morale and communication. And then in month 2, we go to a strengths-based conversation. So instead of us concentrating on things that people aren't doing very well, what about if we concentrated on things that people had innate talents for? In other words, their strengths. What about if we had a conversation about what people enjoy doing? There's a high correlation between what people enjoy doing and what they're good at. Think about your own work there. I'll guarantee to you that the work that you really enjoy is probably the stuff that you do particularly well, and vice versa. So what about a conversation around what people do well? And what about a conversation about how we might actually assist that person to do more of that in their current and future job roles? That would be very affirming and a really positive way to start the conversation, to start the process. In month 3, I would suggest to you it's the most difficult of the 5 conversations, because month 3 is very much around opportunities for growth. So these are things where people can improve their performance standards. So there'll be conversations there. And of course, in each of these conversations, I'm asking the person at the receiving end to come equipped, so they already know the questions that you're going to ask them. So they can already prepare and already have something meaningful and useful to say, which can be very, very helpful in that sense. And then in month 4, we have a learning and development conversation. Now, if we've talked about people's strengths and innate talents, and we've talked about their opportunities for growth, there's probably some reasonable, tangible learning outcomes that have come out of that, and we can have a conversation about that. Not necessarily about sending people off to courses, although that could be the case, but it's really about, it could be about explaining something to people, showing people something, getting people to buddy up with other people in the community. There's a whole range and raft of opportunities there that could come out of that conversation. And from an HR perspective, that's your training needs analysis. You know, you've collected all that data anyway, so if you record it, of course, it can become the training needs analysis. And in month 4 is about working on yourself. Month 5 is about working on the organisation. So this is about making the organisation more efficient and effective. So we want people to bring to that conversation their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives on how we can do things faster, easier, with less cost, with greater quality, with more safety, with more cooperation. So there's a whole lot of parameters there that are open for discussion. But again, the employee comes to that conversation having thought carefully about what it is that they want to talk about. So that's the 5 conversations framework. Happy to answer any questions that you've got around that. I might just show you the process that I use very quickly. Now, bear in mind, I'm not pushing this on you. I'm just showing you a system that works. But the point I want you guys to come up with is something that's going to work for your organisation. I'm just giving you ideas that might stimulate conversation later on. So let's have a look. Step 1 is that what happens is that we collect a template of information about everyone in the organisation, who they report to, and their email address. Now, why do we want that? Well, step 2 is we do a survey. We actually go out and check and do a bit of a snapshot of the organisation of where it's at, so that we can kind of have a before and after snapshot, so that we can see whether this system is actually working or not. Anyone who's a manager, like, or in any leadership role like yourself, would be subjected to some training, and that training would give them a couple of hours. Why are we doing this? What are the questions you ask? How does the system work? What are the benefits, and so forth, and answer any questions that people have got. So once we've done that, the system starts, and there's an online system, which I don't have time to go through, and I don't want to be presumptuous in thinking that that's what you necessarily want to do, but there is an online system where people can record their responses, create action steps and all the rest of it based on, the conversations. So we do one round of the 5 conversations, and I would suggest that organisations should be doing 2 rounds of the 5 conversations a year, which essentially means 10-minute conversations every year with leaders. And again, it sounds daunting, but these are check-in type conversations focused on very specific questions around the 5 topics I went through before. You will see performance increase, and certainly that's been my experience using this around. You'll see both performance in the job roles and the non-job roles, which of course is very important. We do another round of the 5 conversations, and the whole purpose of doing another round of the 5 conversations is, it's an ongoing dialogue, so this never ends. We're constantly doing this. Then what happens is that we reassess the workplace again. And what happens is, has there been changes in the workplace? Have we got some tangible results as a result of what we've done? And that's pretty much it. That's done. So all I'm showing you there, if that's up on your screen, yep, oh, it's gone again. There it is. What you're seeing there is pretty much a snapshot, or perhaps what I should say is a screenshot of the online portal for the 5 conversations. And this is a manager's portal. They happen to be managing one person, Mickey Mouse. Person is Walt Disney. It's all fictitious, of course. And you've got a number of status. You've got a number of things up here that people can use. You've got action planning opportunities and so forth. So there is a system behind it that can perhaps guide and inform the 5 conversations framework. Okay, so I might just finish there, Megan. I'm just going to try and unmute you so that you can, we can just sort of just check in. Let's see if I can do that. Whoop, I almost unmuted you. Hello, Megan, can you hear me? Hello, Megan. Okay. Oh, hang on. There's a message here from you. Yeah, I can't hear you, but you can hear me. Exactly. I haven't been able to unmute you for some reason. What I might, just bear with me, I'll see what I can do. I'll make you an organizer and see if that makes it easier. Let's see if that works. Let's see if I can unmute you now. Oop. Hello, Megan, can you hear me? Right, hasn't worked. All right. I was just going to suggest that we break for lunch now, give people a chance to gather their thoughts around questions, and hopefully we can sort out this audio issue. after the break. Do you want to just, here we go. We don't have a microphone. We can call you after lunch and do questions. Brilliant. Thanks, Megan. All right, well, guys, enjoy lunch, and I'm really looking forward to having an interactive session with you in that half an hour after lunch. So we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock, and during that time, we will. I'll be really happy to respond to questions. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll be back soon. Hi, Megan. So should I mute myself here on the screen now? All right, I'll just try this, see what happens.